two things we can think about here. Oftentimes, we think about marginal product of labor rather than the unit labor requirement. Well, it turns out that the unit labor requirement is simply 1 over the marginal product of labor in each of the two industries. So one is simply the inverse of the other. Notice, of course, what that means is that the higher the unit labor requirement, the lower the marginal product of labor in that industry, and vice versa. Now, one other assumption that we're going to make is that these unit labor requirements are different in the different industries. So this doesn't break your brain too much. Let's use an example. So let's assume that for Portugal, our home country, that the unit labor requirement in wine is 2 and the unit labor requirement in cloth is 1. Which industry is more productive? Cloth, right? So remember, unit labor requirements, you want a small number because that'll tell us that the marginal product of labor is bigger. So this also implies that the marginal product of labor is 1/2, and this implies that the, sorry, it's not 1 over it. Hold on. Got a lot more time. This implies that the marginal product of labor in wine equals 1/2. It implies that the marginal product of labor in cloth equals 1. So again, we can see the workers are more productive in the cloth industry. We're going to assume that the labor force in Portugal is 3,000 workers. Okay. Now, a couple things that we can do. We're going to let Q sub W be the quantity of wine that we're producing. So if that's the quantity, and it takes A sub LW, unit labor requirement to produce each unit, then the product of those two will tell us the total amount of workers that we actually need in that industry to produce that output. Right? So if we're going to produce this output, and this is how many units of labor it requires for each unit, then the product will tell us the total amount of labor that we need to use. We can also do that for the cloth industry. So for any given level of output, we can determine what the number of workers are that we require in that industry. Now remember, we have a limited number of workers in the country, 3,000. And all workers are going to be employed, so they're either going to be working in one industry or the other. So substituting unit labor requirements times quantities, rather than the number of workers, allows us to write this particular equation as our labor constraint. So notice this is just a way of writing that labor constraint that we had in the previous chart. Now we can take this labor constraint and we can solve for the quantity of wine, which is 4 cloth, but we're going to solve for the quantity of wine. So when we solve for the quantity of wine, we get this fixed amount, the total labor force divided by the unit labor requirement in wine, times this ratio of the unit labor requirements, times the amount of cloth that we are producing. The thing to notice about this particular equation is that it shows us that there is a trade-off between how much cloth we can produce and how much wine we can produce. We can see that there's a trade-off because there's a minus sign here. If you're going to produce more cloth, you must produce less wine. If you're going to produce more wine, you must produce less cloth. So that's the trade-off. The trade-off ratio, that is how quickly we have to trade them off, is given by this ratio of unit labor requirements. So this expression can be thought of as the rate of trade-off of one good for the other. By the way, that rate of trade-off is sometimes called the opportunity cost. So remember, all that opportunity cost is saying is what else could we be doing with our resources? Right? So with our resources, which is only workers, we can either produce wine or cloth. If we want to produce more of one, we have to produce less of the other. So that will tell us what that opportunity cost is. What is the lost production in wine in order to produce more cloth? Or what is the lost production in cloth if we want to produce more wine? Now, you may not recognize it, but this particular equation here is actually our production possibilities right here. So let's see if we can figure out what this looks like. So using the information that we had in our example a couple slides earlier, so that was what? The unit labor requirement for wine was 2. The unit labor requirement for cloth was 1. And we have a total of 3,000 workers. So the first thing that we want to figure out is what is the maximum amount of wine that we can produce? Well, that would be equal to all the workers only working in the wine industry. So it'll be the total number of workers that we have divided by the unit labor requirement. Which in this case is 3,000 divided by 2 equals 1,500. I hope those are cases or cargo ships or something like that, not just bottles. Smile. If you get extra points. Okay, so there's 1,500. That's the maximum amount of wine that Portugal can produce here. Now, as our second step, all we need to think about is what is the maximum amount of cloth that we can produce. Again, it's just the total labor force divided by the unit labor requirement to produce cloth. So in this case, we can produce 3,000 units of cloth, which will be out here. And then, of course, we know again that we can be anywhere in between, but because the unit labor requirements are fixed, this becomes our production possibilities frontier. Now notice, the slope of this, you can see from the previous equation, is the ratio of the, that's not what you can see, is the ratio of the unit labor requirements. Which in this case was minus 1/2. And this, by the way, is sometimes called the marginal rate of transformation. You remember that from micro, right? It's how we can transform one good into another, the rate at which we have to give up production of one in order to increase the production of the other. It is, of course, also the opportunity cost of producing one. So notice that the slope here is constant. So if we want to produce one more unit of wine, we have to give up 2 units of cloth. This direction, this direction. So the fact that this is a straight line follows directly from our assumptions that all labor is fully employed and labor is homogeneous, or we have constant marginal product of labor. So that's where that particular situation comes from. Now, this production possibilities frontier is also this country's ISO value line. Remember, an ISO value line just tells us constant value regardless of the quantities being produced. What are the various quantities of wine and cloth that we can produce that are going to generate the same value of output? So the production possibilities frontier and the ISO value line are actually one and the same. Okay, any questions on how we got here? Okay, so again, one of the things that we can talk about then is thinking about the opportunity cost of increasing cloth production. So as long as we can remember our unit labor requirements, if we want to increase cloth production, we need more workers in cloth. So we need to move them out of wine production. So to increase cloth production by 1 unit, we need 1 unit of labor. As we take 1 unit of labor out of wine production, we're going to lose a 1/2 unit of wine. So that then gives us this ratio of 1/2, which is just the ratio of the unit labor requirements between cloth and wine. Now, an easy way to remember the ratio of the unit labor requirements is that it's always talking about the opportunity cost of producing the good that's on the horizontal axis, in this case cloth. So our slope, or our ratio of unit labor requirements, will be the unit labor requirement in cloth divided by the unit labor requirement in wine. So notice numerator here, horizontal axis here. This gives us the opportunity cost of producing cloth. Give us producing more cloth. By the way, we can't really drop the minus sign because it's irritating some sloppy mathematics. Okay, so I'm going to let you spend a few minutes here with this data for England, working out what the production possibilities frontier should look like for this country. So take a few minutes and work on that. And then we'll come back to that. So you can, it's on slide 31, we'll give you an opportunity to draw that right on your notes. But you should be able to figure out that equation pretty straightforwardly. Okay, everybody got it? Everybody do it? So again, the easiest way to work this out is to figure the maximum quantity of wine in England simply be the number of workers divided by the unit labor requirement in wine. 6,000 divided by 3, which means they can produce 2,000 barrels of wine. The maximum amount of cloth, still labor force divided by the unit labor requirement in cloth, 6,000 divided by 6, or 1,000 units of cloth. And the slope should be the ratio of the unit labor requirements, cloth to wine, equals 2. So if we come up here, we've got wine over here, we said we could produce 2,000 units of wine, cloth on the horizontal axis, 1,000 units of cloth. So our production possibilities frontier is given by those 2 points in straight line in between. Notice how easy it is as long as you make the assumption that we have constant labor productivity. The slope here, of course, is that ratio of unit labor requirements so we have a slope of 2. which tells us what the opportunity, oh, by the way, this is the marginal rate of transformation, which is also the opportunity cost of producing cloth. So notice that in this case, that if we wanted to increase the production of cloth by 1 unit, we would have to give up 2 units of line in order to do so. So, what the production possibilities frontier tells us is what the various combinations of wine and cloth that either England or Portugal can actually produce. Right? So I call it a production possibilities frontier. The businesses themselves don't care where we are along that production possibilities frontier. This is just what we're capable of producing, the various combinations. What determines what actually gets produced is going to be consumers and their buying patterns. So consumers and their buying patterns will be determined by things like taste and preferences. And we can typically meld taste and preferences into indifference curves. At the aggregate level or the country level, we often refer to these as country indifference curves, sometimes community indifference curves. So this is going to tell us, these country indifference curves are going to be able to tell us how much consumers are going to want to buy. Equilibrium, of course, will exist only when producers are producing exactly what it is consumers want to purchase. So we need to meld those two together to find out where equilibrium is in each of these two countries. So we can do that. Let's see, we're back here to Portugal. As I recall, Portugal was 1,500 and 3,000. So this gives us our production possibilities frontier. And now to figure out where consumers are, we need to have our country indifference curves. So I'm just going to draw a country indifference curve. So country indifference curves have all the same characteristics of individual indifference curves. They're downward sloping to the right. They get flatter and flatter both as we go to the right and steeper and steeper as we go to the left. They increase as we move away from the origin. All of those other things that happen. And of course, the slope of the community indifference curve, or any indifference curve, tells us that as consumers, what we're willing to trade off, one good or the other. What leaves our consumption, how we can change our consumption pattern and still leave our level of utility indifferent. So in the way I've drawn this then, this should be the tangent, see? Pretty close. We'll call that point A. And so for Portugal, we can see that when we're producing exactly what consumers want to buy, then the demand for wine will also equal the supply of wine. The demand for cloth will also equal the supply of cloth. Now remember that the marginal rate of transformation, from a production perspective, how we transform, how we get out of one good and how much more of the other good that we can get, is simply given by the ratio of our unit labor requirements, that is, our opportunity cost. Well, notice that on our country indifference curve, we're exactly tangent here at point A, which means that the marginal rate of substitution at that particular point is also equal to the ratio of the unit labor requirements, which is also equal to the opportunity cost. So in a closed economy, an economy in autarky, no international trade, when the economy is in equilibrium, the marginal rate of transformation equals the marginal rate of substitution. Producers and consumers are equally indifferent to that particular production mix. Now, just one thing to notice here, and that is that for this country, Portugal, the quantity of cloth relative to the quantity of wine. So notice this is a relative quantity, not absolute. So I'm taking both demand and supply variable, we'll call that quantity, taking that as a ratio of cloth to wine. That ratio is relatively high. Now, one other thing to point out. I said earlier that the production possibilities frontier is also the business's ISO-value line. It turns out that in a closed economy, that the ISO-value line and the production possibilities frontier are also the consumer's budget constraint. Remember, production, the value of production is also the total income that's being earned. So the ISO-value line and the budget constraint turn out to be identical. The concepts that they lay on top of one another. So we maximize utility, subject to a budget constraint, we're also maximizing the value of production at point A. Now let's do the same thing for England.